Hello, founders. Welcome to Startups.com. We are live. We have an amazing show for you today, every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But on Wednesdays, we are talking about go-to-market strategies and traction hacking, the almighty traction hacking to get to the point where you've got product market fit or you're experiencing that 10x explosive growth that startups are known for. We're here with a great panel today. We want to hear from everybody out there. We're discussing what founders are working with right now. I'd like to introduce my team co-hosts today, fellow founders and advisors. First, I got Ryan Rattan, Chief Marketing Officer here at Startups.com, and he is one of the founding members here. And Ryan, how many startups have you done?
Oh my God! Do you want the failed ones too?
Yeah, let's talk about them all.
Have?
They're all learning lessons.
I can't count them all because they're out of fingers and toes. Yeah, no. Let's say there are. I think we are at 8 official, 9 now. I suppose 9 official, 4 exits.
Yeah,
and I keep forgetting the one last year. I just keep writing it off. I don't know why.
It's so fresh.
I got so used to saying 3 for like 10 years that I just can't remember that there's a 4th in there.
Habits die hard. Ryan, question for you. What got you into the whole marketing thing? Like, at what point in time did you realize, hey, I'm really good at this marketing thing. Let's go career. That's what I want to do.
Dude. Funny story. I didn't realize what I was doing at the time, but funny story. I'm 6 years old. We are in a subdivision in a small town in Tennessee. And there's a lot of construction. We're one of the first houses built in the subdivision. There's all these construction crews. One of my friends created a lemonade stand, and I noticed that some of the workers walked over and bought lemonade. And I was like, well, that's cool. What if I throw it in my radio flyer wagon? So I started driving around my radio flyer wagon to all the construction sites, slinging lemonade out of Igloo cooler. And then after a couple of days, some of the guys stopped buying. And I asked why. And they said, well, it's a little too sweet for me. So I went, asked my dad, can you reinvest some of my profits here? I need a second Igloo cooler.
Nice.
I need to make a sour batch. And so then I had 2. And so I think it was that point. So like this goes deep for me. I love watching how people experience product and service and thinking about how we improve it, how we communicate it, and how we make it work for people. So I don't know when it started, but that's the first really good story I have about it.
That's amazing. Well, we are all the better because you are selling lemonade. Appreciate that. Right. Appreciate your folks.
We all got to start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Tony, you are right now one of our talent advisors here. You help startups acquire talent, figure out co-founders, hire, technical, all that stuff, because you are doing that as part of your main gig. But you're also a fellow founder. How many startups have you done?
So I've started 3, and I've been early stage sales and marketing for a lot of startups back in the early mid 2000s. Back, we're talking like Backstreet Boys era, right? So to kind of like date myself a little bit, right? So, but yeah, it's like, and even like when you're doing talent advising and recruiting, I mean, I always say it's kind of like the ultimate form of sales and marketing, because I'm selling myself to my client, I'm selling myself to my candidates, and I'm selling them to each other, and I'm selling myself to everyone. So, it's always like sales and marketing on roids.
We are all in sales, really, what it comes down to. I remember reading that book by Daniel Pink, To Sell is Human. And it's just constantly selling. It was one of the seminal books that I read. I want to invite the audience. We got some people popping into the live audience. Appreciate you joining us. At any point in time, use the Q&A box or chat to ask questions when it comes to your startup. In fact, if you want to talk about go-to-market strategies, you want to talk about growth, traction hacking, put in the chat right now what your startup is so we can use your startups as kind of examples. Just put it in the chat. And we have the illustrious Jen. She's lurking in the background. Jen, if you can just quickly remind and prompt everybody, put in your startup and let us know so we can access it and we can start to make this contextually relevant for everybody. I wanted to quickly touch upon this. This show, everything we do, is brought to you by us at Startups.com. And I would be remiss if I did not constantly point out that we have an amazing podcast called Startup Therapy. We have one of the co-hosts here with us right now of that podcast. And it's a no BS look at startup life. It is hosted by Ryan and Will, our CEO and founder. If you look at the topic, like, are startups easier for experienced founders? And then the latest ones were like, who's working for who? Let's get back to our why. How we secretly lose track or control of our startups. There are so many great topics, and it's the reason that I'm here listening to Startup Therapy. So if you have not done so already, it's going to be in the description, the show notes. Check out Startups.com and the Startup Therapy podcast. Without further ado, this is what I want to get into, boys. Let's jump into what we're calling the mom test, or what is affectionately referred to as a mom test. And I think a lot of founders get to the point where I say the mom test and they don't really know, right? Yeah, you've got your copy. I got my copy on my shelf. I should have went and
I
grabbed
bring
it.
this thing out every Monday, every Friday during my Getting Customers workshop. There is always somebody in that room who hasn't seen it that needs to see this thing. This isn't a prop for today's show. This thing is literally on my desk as a visual aid every single week.
You know what the other thing is the author of the book wrote another book about writing books that sell.
Yeah.
And that's
Yep.
another fantastic book.
Rob Fitzpatrick.
It's
Absolute
absolutely incredible.
genius.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny.
Cool.
In preparation for today's show, I went back through and looked at some of my like hand scratch notes on my iPad from the first time I read this. And one of my favorite notes was highlighted in yellow. It says, "Rob is smart. Connect on LinkedIn."
That's a good note. And did you connect with him or what's going on?
Sure did. Sure did.
Man.
We connected over. Yeah. So he's living in Spain now. So we've done some commiseration around what it's like to get there, how complicated it is, but how wonderful it is once you're there.
That is absolutely fabulous. Okay, once again, reminder, if you're in the audience, and we just got a reminder there, use the Q&A box or chat to ask questions. Anything that we say sparks a question. You can abscond this show. We want to prioritize your questions. We will adjust and make it relevant to you. But let's take a look. The mom test, all right? We bring this up all the time. So Mr. Ryan Rattan, Chief Marketing Officer, give us the lowdown on what is the mom test if you're explaining this to founders.
Look, this is in my must-read list for founders. It's non-negotiable. If you haven't read this, I'm going to tell you to read it until you have, or tell me that you have. If you lie to me, I'll know because I'll see it. I'll watch it happen in real time. It's very apparent who has done successful customer interview and who has not. So super, super important read. This just teaches how to validate ideas effectively. Right? This isn't just at the beginning when you're launching your startup. Anytime you're going to launch a new feature, product line, new service, this becomes really useful again. And it's a super simple. Like the other thing I love about this book, look at how not thick that is. I'll probably get it wrong, but I think it's 126 pages. This is like a nitro coffee and a comfy chair in an afternoon, and you're through this thing. All right. Brilliant book. It really helps us to ask the right questions, not ask the wrong questions, and get useful and actual helpful feedback from people, and not encourage them to accidentally lie to us by asking them leading questions. Right. It's brilliant in its simplicity and its effectiveness. It just works.
Let's talk about what happens when you don't use the principles mom test. You're actually, and this is a little misleading because the mom test is what you don't want to do because moms are always going to lie to you. What happens, Ryan, what do you see advising members here at Startups.com when they don't use the principles and they don't use it properly? What's the result?
Yeah, there's sort of three main flavors here, right? The first one is you use the mom test and you get it right and you get proper feedback that doesn't mislead you. Flavor two is you go into it looking for a particular outcome and ask the types of questions that will lead you to confirm your suspicion, whatever it was. And you can easily do this, right? We all know how to ask leading questions. We all know how to get the answers we want. The third version is, and neither of these two versions are any worse than the other. They're both bad for you. The other one is you don't really have a process. You start to hear some feedback, but you're still asking accidentally leading questions. And people will tell you something, right? People will answer a question, but we start asking to do things like predict the future, right? People are not good at this. I can't remember what I had for lunch last Tuesday. I can definitely not tell you what's going to happen next Tuesday. So the minute we start asking leading questions, we are incentivizing people. And because they're kind and they want to be helpful, they will answer and they will get it wrong most of the time, not out of malice, not out of anything other than they just don't know, but they've been asked to answer, therefore they will. And then we take this as factual information and we start to take actions against it. This is where things go off the rails really, really quickly, right? When we get a bunch of what starts to look like objective data and feedback that's been so biased by the ways we ask the questions, we start to believe in it. And then we start to go and build things and hire people and raise funds and do stuff predicated on unintentional, zero malice, but still lies.
And some of the extreme forms that I've seen in this, especially with members here at Startups.com, you chunk in $150,000, you YOLO $150K of your own money in building something that you thought was a great idea. All your friends thought it was a great idea. I've literally had founders tell me, they say, you know what, my sister-in-law told me, oh yeah, our company will use this. We think it's a great idea. And then they build it. When it's time to actually sign on the dotted line and pay money, they are nowhere to be found. And the founder's disillusioned, really upset. It happens all the time.
All the time. And look, it's not the sister-in-law's fault. She was asked to predict the future. Would you use something like this? Well, and here's what's going on in their mind. I want you to like me. And this does seem like a pretty good idea. And you're my brother-in-law. So yeah, this is definitely something we'd be interested in, right? How often we say, yeah, that's definitely something we'd be interested in. Famous last words, right? It's misled more founders down a very sad path than any other phrase I can think of other than the checks in the mail.
That's a good one. That's a good one too. Tony, what's your experience with the mom test?
Yeah, I think, Ryan hit a lot of nails on the head. And I think it's really important that we go into it almost with a scientist like mindset where when we start to understand when people mention like anecdotal problems and challenges that they're having, it's really important that we can quantitate that, right? How often is that happening? When's the last time that happened, right? Because we can always figure out that that might be an issue, but if it's rarely happening, then that's going to give us really, really good insights to the size of the problem that we're trying to tackle and take on. And so what I always say is we're battling against the world of status quo. And status quo basically means is, yeah, it could be a problem, but is it a big enough problem to make people disrupt what they're currently doing and make a change, right? And so I always say is like, hey, when I'm going and I'm talking, to somebody like with, interviewing a customer, I really try to make sure that I'm listening 80% of the time, only talking 20%. And I'm never really talking about my solution itself. I'm gathering information. That's all I'm trying to do is like, I want to learn about your life, what you're doing, the issues, how often. And then I'm going to basically aggregate that data and really have an unbiased opinion, right? So it's field testing, right? I'm just collecting data and then dealing with it later, right? Because to Ryan's point, if we start leading the witness, it's very, very easy. We start to hear what we want to hear and not what
we yeah,
and
for sure.
What can get founders in trouble is that cognitive bias in their head. And when you start to hear anything that remotely resembles what you want to hear, then you start thinking, oh, this is an amazing idea. Everyone's going to buy it. This is the second coming. I've got the greatest startup in the world. It's going to be so disruptive. I found this really great little sketch thing of Sketchly ideas. I'll put the link to this article in the show notes here that everybody can reference. And we just want to give credit where credit is due. But here's with the definition that they put here. The mom test is what most of us do. We ask people who know us if they like our ideas. Every part of it is wrong, okay? And it expands just a little bit. When you rely on the mom test, you fail to properly validate your ideas, but get positive feedback. This leads to bad decisions. So let's talk for a moment, and we've touched on this, but specifically when it comes to validating an idea, I think this is important. So let's set it up. A founder is sitting there and says, I have an itch, and this is usually how it starts. I have an itch that I want to scratch, or I see something and I can go solve this idea. How does the mom test play out in terms of validating the idea? Ryan, walk us through the mechanics, and Tony and I will have some contributions just to how we've used the mom test or haven't in our own startups.
Sure. Let's start with one of the core concepts of the mom test. And one of those is that we have to stop selling during our interviews. You are pitch slapping people now. We can't do this. We cannot introduce the product in the interview. We have to talk about the problems. We have to do all of the other things. We have to ask all of the questions that set up what are you currently doing? That's good to know, right? We need to know that. But if we just ask them, hey, if this thing was here, would you use it? They'll probably say yes, because, well, that seems like we might use it. But if there's already another solution, to Tony's point, status quo, super, super powerful force, right? Inertia is a real thing in marketing. Behavioral change, super hard to enforce. So stop selling during the interviews. Your product pitch does not belong in a customer interview. We also want to avoid hypotheticals, right? It's exactly the thing I just said. Asking people about their future intentions is a fantastic way to get them to lie to you, right? No better way, in fact, because they won't even know they're doing it. They'll tell you, yeah, probably, right? So we have to be really careful about that. Instead, ask about specific past experiences. Okay, normally works out great. Was there an experience where it didn't, right? And this is where we start to find out what are the flaws in the status quo. If there is something that they are doing, that window of opportunity for us is the place where they're still dissatisfied, right? Past experience where it went right, okay, they're doing it. This is the thing. Past experience where it went wrong. This is that little tiny window of opportunity for us to build a product that satisfies that particular need. So instead of asking leading questions, we need to do something like never ask, do you think this is a good idea, right? Because unless you're talking to a total sociopath, they're probably going to want to say yes. Why? Because you're sitting right in front of them and they have no dog in this fight. What is their incentive to tell you no? Okay, you'll run into the odd know-it-all. And that can be just as bad feedback, because then they can give you false negatives. They're like, no, this will never work. Why? Because this person never thinks anything's going to work. Also useless feedback, right? So instead, think about things like, tell me about the last time you dealt with insert specific problem here, right? And Rob has an entire list of these in the book, but I'll give you a couple more. What have you tried so far to solve this, right? Great question. Because this tells us what they're doing now, right? This helps us to understand the status quo. How much does this problem cost you, right? So, because that's a thing, right? If we find out, out of 20 times, 3 times we didn't get our package. And once it was a Christmas present for the kids and it was a huge disaster and they were pissed at us for the rest of the year. Okay, that's a real cost. And so that might be something they're willing to solve. If it turns out they're like, oh, once we didn't get the box of cornflakes and, so we ate Captain Crunch instead. And we like not having to pay for this. That's good feedback too. We need to understand that, right? Start to understand willingness to pay without asking people, would you be willing to pay for this? Because of course they'll say, probably, right? Or something, or just yes. right? Until they're voting with their wallet, that's never good feedback.
Okay, hang on. I want to pause you right there because this illustration illustrates what you just said. If we look at this here, it talks about the problem. So here we are in this problem. And so
it's hard to tell because I have a different haircut, but that's actually me in those illustrations. That's me standing in front of the whiteboard.
Man, good looking kid right there. Okay. So you're pitching, here's our idea. What do you think? And they say, great, share, everyone loves it. So we're sharing the idea. Everybody loves it. Why? It says right here, because they don't want to hurt your feelings, but when it gets to it, will they actually pay for it? Why did they buy from me? Right. And people will lie to themselves, right? They'll lie to you. They'll lie to themselves. And Ryan, I think that's something that you pointed out is really specific, is that people will tell you all sorts of things if money is not on the line. And that's the reason you want to ask questions about the problem first and see how bad it is and get to the point. You're like a doctor. You press until it hurts because the more it hurts, the more they're going to pay. So let's sit on this for a second. Tony, what's been your experience with the almighty? What are the questions to ask to talk about the problems?
Yeah, I think one of the other ones, again, when we think about the who, what, when, why, I think frequency, because we might realize that this is not a high velocity enough problem that needs to be solved, right? And so we get in love with the idea and the data is not telling us enough of that information, right? And so I really want to get a better idea of how big is the potential problem that we're trying to solve, whether it's frequency, geography, population, whatever the case may be. So I'll constantly dig in with founders and asking them types of questions of do we really have an idea of how big of a problem is this actually solving? And to Ryan's point, earlier, I won't quite do this, necessarily during the mom test frequency, but one of my favorite questions that I discovered early on in a founder journey was not would you buy this product, is why wouldn't you? And that's where I always started kind of digging in a little bit more and kind of finding out more information about if there really was a problem there, and realizing I might have to kill this idea early, because I had a lot of great ideas where I'm laying on my couch 2 a.m. watching The Office, this is the best idea ever, and then I start talking to people it's not happening. And then I take it out in the barn and shoot it.
Okay. But I want to pause you for a moment. And I want to point out the elephant in the room for people going to be watching this, especially the founders here. When you are going and doing a startup and you plan on raising money, this becomes a big issue. Tony pointed it out. You may validate that it's a problem for 2 people or 10 people. But if you're going to look for startup investors, you need to make sure it's a big enough problem. That's the reason we do market sizing. And you have to figure out, the more you know about your market, you have to show the investor that's a big enough problem with billions behind it, that people are already either spending billions on it, or they could spend billions if you create a new category, or else you are not going to get an investor. So it's not just validating whether the problem exists, it's understanding how pervasive it is, how painful, the frequency of it, how many people are involved in terms of being affected by the problem. Ryan, I'm sure you see this all the time where people are trying to solve a problem. I can't get funding because it's not a big enough problem.
Not a big enough problem. And I think this goes back to, so Tony pointed out a couple of things. I'm going to take one step further back before we get into the severity of the problem, the frequency of the problem, which is, how do we find out if there's a problem to begin with? Right? Sometimes the problem is a lot of founders will seek praise rather than problems. The minute we start to seek praise rather than problems, by praise, I mean, we're looking for validation. Look, we're out there. We're holding our baby up to the world. We want to hear it's pretty, right? That's not what you want to hear. It is what you want to hear. It's what you want to feel. But in order to get to pretty baby, we got to go find problems, right? So we have to ask questions. We have to seek out real problems. Polite feedback is not going to help you. Right? It's not people telling you, yeah, I like your idea. In order to validate the idea, we have to seek problems, right? And Tony touched on this, but let's go a step back. So we really want it to dig in, right? And if they're not complaining about something in status quo, they're not a customer, right? There's got to be some complaint in it. There's got to be some sense of pain. And so that's where we have to go digging. You said it, Ed. We got to keep probing and poking at the doctor until they go, ouch, right? That's when we know we're somewhere in the right neighborhood, right? Or there's some signs of life for this thing. So, if they're not complaining, not a customer. This is just a general rule of thumb for me that I try to live by. Seems to serve me fairly well. The next one is, let's get into the severity of the problem, right? Is this pants on fire problem, right? One of my silly metaphors that I love to use is, I sell plumbing services and I walk into your house and I see there's a leaky faucet and I'm like, hey, would you like me to fix your leaky faucet? Right? I see that problem. And they go, well, actually, we could probably do that. But maybe if you could come back later after the firemen finish putting out the fire, it would be better, right? So what's the hierarchy of problem, right? Just because we see a problem and it exists and they acknowledge it, does not necessarily mean that it fits anywhere in the hierarchy that says we're going to do anything about it in the near term, right? There are some nice to solve problems, and then there are some like, we got to do this right now type problems. Clearly, you want to be seeking out populations that have we need to solve this right now. Right. And so again, your goal is not to get praise, it's to find problems. And your goal is not to find problems, but to find urgent problems. We have to be finding urgent, pressing, real problems. How do we do that? Well, let's find out by asking questions that speak to the severity of it. Right. Tony talked about some of these things before, and things like cost, time spent, frequency. These things all matter a ton when we're trying to figure out exactly where this fits in the hierarchy of problems for any given founder, right? One of the things I like to do is try to get to real metrics with the questions rather than feelings, right? I don't want to walk away from a customer interview with a positive vibe, right? Sure, that feels nice, right? Yeah. Like positive vibes are great.
Feels great.
You can't raise money on positive vibes. I've tried. It doesn't work. So what we want to do is look for measurable feedback, right? Are they actively trying to solve this problem today? Right? Are they seeking solutions? Are they currently using a solution that isn't meeting all of their needs? Right? These are fantastic. This tells us they're already engaged and looking. All right. How much time is it costing you to not solve this? How much money is it costing you to not solve this? How much opportunity are you leaving on the table? What are the real feelings it's bringing out in this user as they try to figure out what to do about this thing?
Okay. You segued us beautifully to the next portion. I got more.
I'm telling you, I live in this diagram, Ed.
I got more questions for you though, but check it out. We talk about the problem and then there's a solution, and here we are here. And I love this. It says, ask about their life, not your idea. So you're not leading them. You're asking them what they experience. Ask for specific examples in the past, not generics, opinions about don't ask about opinions about the future. You said they can't predict it. Talk less, listen more. It's great. Okay. And so you want to ask about the problem solution, but let me ask you this, okay? Let's just jump ahead a little bit here. Ryan, we've now validated, we've asked all the questions, we're not pitching the solution right there. At what point in time do you talk about your solution during this whole process?
You may or you may not. It depends on how much your solution already exists, right? If it doesn't actually exist, don't try to turn a good customer interview into a sales call if you actually don't have anything to sell. I see people do this all the time. They'll all of a sudden they'll be on a really good track. Because I have people send me their customer interviews. I watch these things, and there's nothing more painful than watching a really good interview go off the rails because all of a sudden somebody was like, oh, I see it. And then they go happy puppy and they're like, let me jump up in your lap and lick your face. No, don't do that. Slow down, calm down.
Don't lick their face. Do not lick their face.
You don't. And so what ends up happening is that you get excited. Again, you start to get that praise and you start to feel good, or you see an opportunity, and then you go try to sell something that doesn't exist. Now, in the case that your solution does actually exist, there are times where customer interviews can lead to a sales opportunity. Sometimes it can even happen on the same call. In my experience, they've been better handled by letting that come through feedback from the user after the interview. All right. And it'll often come in the form of something like, after all that stuff we talked about today, like, can you tell me a little bit more about what you're working on? Or seems like you understand the problem really well. Like, yeah, I do. Would you like to talk about what potential solutions to it are? And then we book another call, right? I prefer to really bifurcate these things, because when I'm in the customer interview process, in customer interview mode, the most important thing to me is taking away the learnings that I need to do this better and better and better. If you start treating each one of these customer interviews as a potential sales opportunity and get your focus there, in my opinion, in my experience, hard-earned, you screw up the customer interview process and you probably botch the sales opportunity.
Yeah, totally.
So I prefer just to keep these things focused. But again, if somebody starts to really push back or say like, look, how can you help me? Don't shy away from that, right? Don't shy away from it. Lean into it. And again, depending on what you have to offer. If you don't have your product yet, is there a service offering? We talked about this in the last episode, right? If we're going to go product, can we service it first, right? Is there a way to begin to help that particular client in the moment? And if there is, sure, go for it.
Let's get tactical here for a moment and figure out how to get into that environment, because this is where I see founders flail all the time. They're like, I don't have anybody to talk to. So right now, you want to talk to people and you're going to work your way to it. Like, you'll probably talk to associates first. You want to talk to people who are as close to that problem and who can really legitimize the data you're getting. But to your point, Ryan, I've seen founders go, and let's talk about the mistakes that people make, even trying to get this interview going. Sure. I've seen founders say, I'm from so-and-so and I'm developing this solution and I want to talk to you about your problem. Like right off the gate, right out of the bat, you are starting on the wrong foot. Instead, I like to say, you know what, I'm researching this problem and these pain points, and I've heard this. I'd love to hear your opinion, and I'd love to just ask you a bunch of questions. That's how typically I go about it. Ryan, how would you suggest you even set it up so that they say, yes, I'll have that conversation with you?
I think it depends a little bit on the environment. Who are these folks? Are you talking about a consumer product where kind of anybody works for it? Are you talking about something that we're only going to sell to the Fortune 100? Very, very different ask. And so I think it depends a little bit on how easy to reach, how valuable is the time of the audience. There's a lot of stuff that goes into the calculus here. But generally speaking, the approach that you talked about is the one I take, right? I'm not saying, hey, I'm building this thing and I want to get your feedback on it, because that's what they're going to want to do. If they say yes, then that's what they show up for. They're like, okay, tell me about your idea and I'll tell you if it sucks or not, right? That's not what I need, right? Yeah. That's not what I need. So it is, I'm researching this. What I typically focus on isn't even the problem, right? I heard you say like, I'm really interested in this problem. In a lot of cases, what I try to talk to is I'm really interested in the population, right? So when we're building Startups.com, founders, right? We're really interested in the problems that founders face, but I don't even want to present them with a particular problem because I want to go find out what the problems they have are. Because again, I don't want to validate that the problem that I'm looking to solve exists. I want to understand all the problems that they have so that I understand where the one that I want to solve for fits in the overall hierarchy.
That's a good one. That's a totally good one. You know what? One of the pro tips, this is my hack. I love using this hack because on Reddit in particular, Reddit is one of the most toxic social media platforms that you can find. Everybody seems bitter and angry on Reddit. Yeah. I will go to Reddit and I will act like a dumb person. And I'll say something completely erroneous or this and that. And I'll get all these people just to throw down their opinions. Yeah, I hate this and I hate that. And I will try and gin it up just to see and get them talking. But I will, as soon as I present any semblance that I might be fishing for a solution, they won't be honest. And so I will ask inflammatory questions. I'll get downvoted into oblivion, but I will really get to the mix of it. And that's one of the hacks that I like to use when I'm going for consumers. To your point, Ryan, it depends on who you're going for. Tony, what are some other ways that you've experienced going and actually getting in front of someone to talk about their problems?
It's funny that Ryan brings that up because I've been running some tests on LinkedIn as far as just connecting with more founders with that kind of exact framework of just kind of learning about what's the most pressing thing going on in your world right now when it comes to hiring, if anything, right? And I'm just collecting information, and basically what that's done for me, that's created relationships where it opens up conversations for down the line where it's allowed me then to kind of go and create selling opportunities later, but we never ever try to go in there and, sell it. What I have found is really, similar to Reddit, like other communities like Discord have been great. And just like, I always say like, hey, try to meet your audience where they're at. In-person events have been really, really good. Facebook groups, I just really try to have a wide sample size of collecting a lot of opinions. And I think the interesting thing that sometimes we forget about when we're doing customer interviews is that sometimes we mix up the end user with who would actually be purchasing this, right? And so when I talk to a lot of founders, I hear a lot of, we're creating a new selling platform, right? We're creating a new SaaS selling platform. That sounds really great. Tell me about who you've talked to. Well, I've talked to 100 BDRs and they all said it's something that they would use right away. So then we start getting into conversations about, have you had any conversations with directors of sales or CROs or anybody who is actually going to be writing the checks? Because again, your end user could be telling you this is a problem, but they don't necessarily have the power or the ability to make a difference in that, right? And so it's good to make sure that we're collecting a lot of static data from all these different points, because we're still in the leave the lights on era where we're not writing checks for products unless it's absolutely essential. And so CRO can say, yeah, that sounds like a problem, but we're getting by. We don't have that information. So I think we're limiting ourselves to that ability to really know who's going to use it versus who's actually going to, pay for using it.
You brought up a really good idea of what I use, and we'll double click on this. And then Ryan, I got another question for you. I will often say, hey, would you mind if I circle back with you later and I'll share with you the findings of my research? So I will always invite them next thing, and that could lead to a sales opportunity, building that relationship. And that's what I like, Tony, what you said. It's starting the relationship, and you never know where they're going to end up. And that's just another pro tip. Take your time, build a relationship. But Ryan, this was a curious quote that I found here. It said, up at the top, it says, your goal is to find out the underlying problem they're trying to address and then work out the best way to address it, which is, you've been talking about this. This is tightly connected to one of the Mom Test Golden Rules. You cannot tell the customer what their problem is or isn't, and in return, they can't tell you how to solve it. Break this down for us, Ryan.
Sure. Well, so again, if we go in and we tell them what their problem is, they may agree with us and they may not be entirely wrong. They're rarely entirely wrong. They're like, hey, do you hate mowing your lawn? I do. And then you find out they live on the fourth floor of a high-rise building in Manhattan. Like, they don't even have a lawn, right? Like, okay, that's an outright lie. Let's assume that like they do hate mowing their lawn, but that they solved that by making their 13-year-old son do it for the last 4 years, right? And so there isn't really a problem. So we can't tell them what their problem is. We don't want to. We don't need to. We want to ask them what their problems are. We let them tell us. They can't tell us what the solution is because, again, we're asking them to predict the future. If they knew what the solution was, they probably would have already engaged in it. They assume that the solution is whatever they're doing now, including doing nothing, right? I think we didn't actually talk about that as one of the status quo states. But just because the solution to the problem that you want to solve doesn't exist does not mean that it will be successful, right? Very, very frequently, there's a reason that a solution doesn't exist. And it's just that people are more willing to just keep doing whatever they're doing and suffering from whatever the problem is than whatever the financial, time, emotional, physical inputs to solving the problem are. Right?
Is that close to, that quote where Henry Ford said, if I would have asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse? Is that what you're talking about?
Very, very similar, right? Very similar. And in that case, right, that may not have even been exactly what they would have said. We don't know, right? That's him guessing what they would have said. So still better to ask, right? Henry Ford was a smart guy, but he doesn't know that's exactly what they would have said. And he doesn't have to. He could just ask them what they wanted, right? But again, he's pointing out the whole point here, which is that if we ask and we lead, then we're likely to get the wrong feedback. In Henry's case, I think, unfortunately, he was basically saying you shouldn't ask your customers.
Yes.
Which I think is very dangerous. So I want to be careful about that one.
Getting customers, it's the Y Combinator tenet where they say half your time should be focused on shipping product, building product. The other half should be talking to users about their feedback, trying to get them to use it, all those things. We got a comment from the audience here and appreciate you sharing with us, Jennifer. The circle back method has worked great. This started off with exploration, validation. I honestly shared that I was trying to find out if it was a good fit. So just being honest, is this even a good fit? I like that. And they love the honesty and become quite helpful. That's just an approach in being straight up and saying, I'm just even exploring whether this happens. Ryan, how much would you agree with that in terms of just being upfront? I'm still exploring.
So I think, again, like I'm trying to understand the comment here to understand in the order of events here, right? So the circle back, pure customer interview, and we weren't leading, we weren't asking. And then the circle back was, would this be a good fit? Fantastic. Awesome. If that was asked during the customer interview, clearly that would go against the ethos of what we're suggesting here today, because you're asking them to predict the future. What I would be asking them instead is, how often are packages shipped, or how often do people complain that they can't have packages shipped? What happens when people try to ship stuff here? How do you ship stuff here? All right. Are you constantly receiving packages? Funny story, and such a sign of the times. I would have used that product. Well, I wouldn't have. I was 8, but we were traveling in our motorhome, and for some reason, and I hope I'm not, this may send somebody to jail. I don't know. One of my uncles, no, it wasn't one of my uncles. It was one of my uncles, gave my father a handgun because we were going into bear country. We were getting ready to head into Montana. And then we wanted to pass into Canada, Ed, and Canada would not let us cross the border with a firearm. So my father had to mail a firearm to another campground, which we then picked up there. Yeah, sure. That happened. I mean, this was 1984, so different, 86, different times.
Us Canadians, we sort of marvel at how other countries treat guns, but that's an aside here. We got lots of people who want to move to Canada after the election right there. But Ryan, you bring up a really great point. And Tony, I'm curious because I've gone through customer interviews, talked about the problems, and I have come up with wild different responses and conclusions based on those customer interviews where I step back and I say like, oh my gosh, I've been barking up the wrong tree this whole time. Thank God I didn't invest all this time and money. And now I'm going to pivot before it's too late. And there's been times where people have told me, they've said, and we're going to get to this concept of bad news, because I've gone out and I've tested and I've tried to get customer data, and they just tell me something that so smacks me in the face and just pops my bubble. Like I'm just completely like right between the eyes. I'm like, oh no, I've been thinking about this the wrong way the whole time. And I've been so grateful. Tony, what have been some times where you've had this revelation hit you where you didn't expect it?
Oh, I mean, it still happens all the time. I mean, even in like recruiting and services, having constant conversations with founders and leaders, you start to see those trends about how they're approaching hiring and realize, what was successful for me in 2022 isn't working anymore. So I think it's an important thing that we're constantly engaging that feedback because it is evergreen and it's always changing. But I can tell you, back a couple of years ago when we were building our AI hiring startup, where we started and where we envisioned it and where it ended up were two completely different things. And a lot of that was based on customer feedback, where we realized we had way too much fat, had too much that wasn't pointed to early value. And so we realized that we needed to pull it back and redirect it early, but the biggest thing is we had to make sure we were talking to enough people to validate the thesis that we were developing, right? Because when we start getting these like off the wall, left field sort of concepts, they would make me stop and think. But then I really want to see, okay, is this an isolated opinion, or is there a real trend here that we're uncovering? And so again, without leading the witness, we continue down that track to really, again, we're collecting data and really trying to understand maybe we should be moving to a different direction because we've uncovered the real problem that needs to be solved.
And you bring up this point precisely right down here. It says you should ask questions about underlying motives. This is, really small right down there. So once you get some feedback, you can keep exploring that and see what's going on, like what's happening below the surface. Often like an iceberg, right? So if you just focus on the tip of it, you're not going to see the real danger or the real gravity of what's going on. But then there's this section right here, Ryan, and I talked about this bad news component right here. So it says bad news is good. It saves you time. How does this save us time?
Well, you want to get the bad news now, right? I don't want to find out, right? Because you know what bad news later is called? A pivot, which is a nice way of saying we built the wrong thing first. Why? Because we didn't get enough customer feedback before we started building, right? So the best time to get bad news is the beginning of the process. Before we start spending time, money, emotion, energy, all that stuff, we can course correct at that point. And that's when you want to do it. Ryan's 4 P's of product. The 3 first P's are proven proprietary process. We like those. And where do we get a proven proprietary process from? We talk to our customers. We deliver value, we deliver service. We figure it out. The 4th P is pivot. Right? We don't want that one.
Yes. Pivots can be super expensive. Don't mind iterations, like mini iterations, but as soon as you got to pivot, now you're in dangerous territory because typically, Ryan, we find founders here that now have a solution looking for a problem, right?
Oh, it's
sunk cost fallacy
in the world.
Yeah. And it's so hard. So let's depart for a second. And I want to set this up. And I want us to talk about sales, okay? Yeah. Ryan, last time we talked about one of the greatest ways to fund your company is to try and sell it as a service first, maybe do some consulting. We've got situations where we have founders, and what they're doing is they're trying to sell it. I got this cybersecurity company. It's kind of the top of consciousness. I've been going back and forth. And I've been trying to help the founder go to their current customers, past customers, potential customers, do the right interviews so they could present the best messaging, unique value proposition, and it's been a struggle. It's been back and forth. So if we need to apply all these principles that we were talking about, Ryan, how would you advise a founder to go and talk to customers to try and, let's say, 10x their revenue? Let's just go right into growth mode, not launch, but increase the revenue. What does that look like?
Are we talking about going back to the customer interview process? Are we talking about like what does direct selling look like for founders?
We're talking about going back and gathering the data so they can do direct selling.
It looks no different. The only difference here is that now we've got a bunch of baked in bias based on previous bullshit that we shouldn't have swallowed in the first place, right? So we've either decided on our own to go build something. So we've got solution that's now looking for problem. Don't bark up that tree. The minute you find yourself in the position where you're like, we've built this thing and now we're just trying to find somebody that wants it, stop, think about who you think wants it, and then go talk to them about their problems. Just do the mom test process. What you're looking for is subtle difference here. The subtle difference is at this point, what you're looking to see is, okay, now once I've got the problem set, do I still believe that my solution fits here? Or did we in fact just build the wrong thing? And again, best time to find that out was before you built it. The next best time is right now, not 6 months from now, if you continue to try to push the boulder up the hill that nobody wants to buy. So it's just about getting in and talking to people. Again, throw the solution out. Don't lead with the solution because you're not going to get the right feedback. You'll probably just keep getting bad news, but a bad news of the sort that you can't react to at that point because all they're saying is no. Right? It's like the number 0. It's super hard to react to. We don't know how to get off no, right? If we're at no and we're just constantly getting no, we have to ask ourselves, what about the validation that we did early on was wrong, right? And then you can kind of go back and say, okay, if we did customer interviews, where did we get this wrong? Where did we allow ourselves to be misled by misleading the interviewees? And what do we need to go back and revalidate, right? So it doesn't have to be kind of square one, start all the way over, but you got to back up and you got to let go of whatever is in hand at this point. It will just hold you back.
Let's expand upon that. What about the scenario where you've had success, right? Like you sold a bunch of product and now it's not selling anymore and you want to go figure out why. And I'll explain what ends up happening. I'll send the founder back and I'll say, go find out why people bought from you in the first place. But they'll go and ask these generic questions and they'll say, why did you buy us from the first place? Oh, you know what? you're innovative. We really liked you. And it doesn't help whatsoever. So what I'm explaining is go and ask the right questions of what was their mindset? What did they try before? And try and break that down, because as your point, you've already got baked in bias of an existing relationship. They want to keep that nice. So how do you go back and sort of reset and retool? Let's say if you've had success and it's not working the same way anymore.
I wouldn't go to the existing customer set. I would go to the previous customer set, and I would do everything I could to get some of those folks on the phone and find out what happened right before you stopped using us, right? What were you doing, right? What about your business changed? Nothing. Our business is exactly the same. What about the problem changed? Oh, there was a regulatory shift and we no longer needed a solution like yours. Okay, cool. Macro shift in the environment. Now we know, right? So you won't know until you start asking, but you have to go back and ask, why did they change their minds? Like, what about them? And again, not why do you think you stopped using us? You want to ask questions about the situation. You want to ask questions about like what was going on at the time. Right? I think we talked about this a few episodes ago. It was something along the lines of, there's this question I love to ask, which is, what was in your mind right before this became relevant to you? Like, what was going on in your world? What was going on in your mind? What were you thinking about right before you decided to start seeking solution, right? You can ask a very similar question. It was like, okay, so what was going through your mind at that point where you decided to stop using this? What were you worried about when you gave us up, right? What were you excited about?
Yep. Good
right?
one.
Oh, we're going to save all this money. We're going to be able to put it here instead, right? So was it just an opportunity cost thing where they decided, did priorities shift, right? Did we just happen to go from pole position to third place in a limited budget, and we just happen to get knocked out, right? There may be something we can do about that. There may not, right? Sometimes problems just evaporate over time, right? Remember that additive we used to have to put into some cars? You wanted to buy unleaded fuel? Not much of a problem anymore.
True. Very true. You're dating us there, Ryan. Just be careful with that. Okay. But Tony, I'm going to pose this question to you, and I'm going to say, let's talk about this situation. So Tony, let's say, for example, and credit to you, you're a consummate salesperson. You're always bragging about all these big, multi-million-dollar deals, and all this stuff. Just giving you your flowers, okay? You're good at sales. This is what I've learned from you. Now, say you had to go back and you needed new messaging and you wanted to increase revenue. Let's say you want to double your revenue and you need to figure out what it is that is working, that hasn't worked. How would you go back to your existing client base or previous client base? How would you approach that so that you could figure this out?
Yeah, we actually went through, this very exercise, at the beginning of the year, because our sales started leveling off, and we really went back and we had a lot of conversations. And, to Ryan's point was their priorities were shifting, the economy was shifting, and we realized that what we were offering anymore wasn't going to work. And so part of what we had to start doing was we had to look, and after talking to dozens of customers and just gathering that information, is we did a hard look, and we realized we were in a commodity-based state. We sounded like everyone else. We did everything else, right? And so we really had to figure out how to cut through some of that noise. And so, we went through a really, really hard rebrand and message, and not just like rebrand, because that's such a broad spectrum approach, but it was more about how we approach the problem and our customers in general, right? So I'm in recruiting, and we think that the blanket issue is that we help you hire. Right. And that's what most recruiters are going to do for mentality. That's not what we do. We help you solve whatever business problem that you're trying to do. So what can you do? Or more importantly, what can't you do? And hiring is sort of the systemic byproduct that moves that engine along. And so with that vision in mind, we went back to customers and prospects and really started to grasp and understand, if you aren't able to get these positions filled or whatnot, what does that mean for your business? And that started being that aha moment where we started having more authentic conversations with customers, building more credibility, but it's a slow roll. And we had to be honest with ourselves, and we liked our branding. We liked our copy. We're like, this worked in 2021, 2022, didn't work in 2024 anymore. And so we had to make some hard choices. It's just an incremental, slow process, and just being honest with ourselves.
What I'm hearing is the principles of the mom test can be used over and over and over again. It really is a first principles based approach. So figure out how to incorporate that everywhere that you go. Got this question from the audience here. It says, is it a good idea to ask these questions and continue to get input from customers to identify potential issues early? Ryan, what's your answer to that? Earlier the better.
Earlier the better. Yep. Before you have a solution, you should be asking these, right? And then really, this is the thing. I think we start off on the wrong foot if we already have our solution in mind.
Yeah.
Right. I say this all the time to founders: don't fall in love with your solution. Fall in love with the people you want to help, the population you want to serve, and then get super nerdy about their problems. Just dig in and figure out where you fit in. Then your unique skill set and your unique value props will start to overlap with their unique problems. And this is where product and solution come from.
And then I'll add on to Ryan. I think that's where the danger of scaling comes in,
Yeah.
because we see that often where we start leveling up, business is growing, we add more team members. The farther removed founders get from the customer, because now I have somebody who does that, the more exposed we are to like missing out on where the market is shifting and what our customers, the problems of our customers need to be. So I just, when I'm advising founders, especially when they're pivoting off of founder-led sales, like you should never really stop selling. You should never, ever, you need to be a part of that, because it's very, very easy to like, you're first today, you're last tomorrow, right? And so it just, scaling is a very, very tricky and dangerous thing.
I've always said it's easier to scale the wrong thing than the right thing. Problems scale twice as fast as success.
And let me end with this, is just kind of wrapping this up with a bow, how we get to that point. I was part of a startup back in .com 1.0 era, and one of our first advisors was one of the initial employees of Microsoft. And he said, don't fall in love with your baby and don't believe your own press. Actually, he said, don't believe your own bullshit, but don't believe your own press. And that's what gets us to these assumptions and things start rolling. We stop listening is the main key. So I'm going to send this out to the founders that have been questioning about that. I appreciate all the audience participation. I'm going to give you two the opportunity to give the last words. How would you summarize all this up? What encouragement? Tony, how about start with you? And then Ryan, just really, I cannot say this more. I want every founder to read this mom test book. Yeah. So that's the reason I'm excited for it.
Go get it. It's inexpensive. It's tiny. It's quick. It will save you years of agony.
Last word for you, Tony. What do you think?
Yeah, I would just say that the cheapest thing that you could ever do that's going to give you the biggest ROI on your business is continuously talking to customers, right? It doesn't cost you a thing, and it's going to give you big dividends no matter what the feedback is.
Ryan?
Listen more, pitch less, past actions over future promises, lead with urgent problems.
Stop pitch slapping. That came out today. That was a new way of using it. I love it. Thanks again, Ryan, Tony. Always a pleasure. Thanks to the audience. If you're watching this on the YouTubes, hopefully we made good internet for you today. Like, comment, subscribe, do the whole social media thing. Appreciate you. We are here every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Wednesdays, we're going to constantly do that go-to-market strategy, traction hacking. We have pitch decks, and we answer all the internet's toughest questions, what founders want to know on the different days. Make sure you check us out. That's it for us today. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.